The powers of darkness do not weaken. Instead, they grow stronger. How can this be? I dreamt of the waterfall on the mountain north of Sunken City. Perhaps the next essence is there. This is Legendary Adventures, a Legend of Zelda playthrough podcast. This week in Oracle of Seasons, we're headed to Sunken City, learning to swim, and diving into the Dancing Dragon Dungeon. But not before we do a little exploring first. The Maku tree clearly points us in a direction to go, but since when have we had to strictly follow the path pointed out to us? I went ahead and spent some time exploring Holodrum. I headed north of Horon. To the east of the lake which contains the Gnarled Root Dungeon, there is another lake known as Eyeglass Lake. And looking at it on the map, we can see why. It is in a rough eyeglass shape, complete with 2 arms rising to the north and 2 islands serving as eyes. I used my flute to call Dimitri to help me reach the eastern island in Eyeglass Lake. There is a portal to Subrosia on this island. This part of Subrosia is home to a Subrosian who is obsessed with signs. And how could he not be? They are simply divine, with a gorgeous design. This particular Subrosian keeps track of how many signs you've destroyed in the game. I had not destroyed any because me and this Subrosian see eye to eye, but I understand that any player who destroys 100 signs can get a ring for their troubles. There's also a furnace in this part of Subrosia. We're told that they melt down different types of ore together, but the master of the furnace and a worker have gone to a temple to seek supplies. To the south of the furnace, we find a platforming challenge. We have to jump over patches of a lava lake in order to reach a bomb flower. We can pick it up with the power bracelet. I had no idea the intended use for this bomb flower, so I just ended up keeping it in my pocket for a while. But it turns out I was kind of on the path of switching up the dungeons. I just didn't actually follow through with it. Once I returned to the surface, I headed north. The path to Sunken City passes through an area known as Natsu. Like the New Highlands and Oracle of Ages, this area changes based upon our chosen animal buddy. Because Dimitri was my chosen buddy, I had to ride Dimitri up the Natsu River, through rapids, and up a waterfall to claim a secret. If I had chosen Moosh, this would be an area pockmarked with holes, and if I had chosen Ricky, this area would have cliffs to jump up and holes to jump over. Sunken City sits on the eastern edge of the map, just below the mountain range on the northern edge of the map. And true to its name, Sunken City is constantly flooded. Houses sit in water, and there's little land visible above the water. We're told this is due to runoff. At a house near the entrance, a man tells us his father is a master diver who has a secret diving spot. He never told his son where it is, however. Inside the house, we meet the diver's wife. She tells us her husband is old and has hidden his diving gear away somewhere. We must find him and get that diving gear. I know from my previous playthrough that Dimitri is required to navigate Sunken City. I didn't take him with me into the city, so I had to walk outside the city limits and use the flute to call him. I then walked back in. Players who don't have Dimitri as their chosen animal buddy will find him surrounded by a group of kids on the south side of town. It's very reminiscent to when we found him on Crescent Island in Oracle of Ages. The Tokay on Crescent Island traded Dimitri for ember seeds. The kids of Sunken City will leave him alone in exchange for bombs. On the east side of Sunken City, we find a Gale Seed tree. With the Gale Seeds, we can travel to any mystical seed tree that we come across in Holodrum. It's the fast travel system of the game. To the north of the Gale Seed tree, there is a pair of waterfalls on either side of a tree stump. We can swim up those waterfalls with Dimitri. There are 2 more waterfalls that pour out of caves on the upper area of Sunken City. We swim up the waterfall on the right to find the hiding place of the Master Diver. The Master Diver says if we want to become his pupils, we must go to the adjacent cave and open the eyes of 4 statues in a single stroke. In the adjacent cave, we find those 4 statues laid out in a vague zigzag pattern. If we hit a statue with our sword, the eye will open. In order to open all 4 eyes in a single stroke, we have to push the statues closer together, in 2 rows with just 1 space in between. We use the spin attack to hit all 4 statues. For completing the task, we gain access to a chest which holds the Master's plaque. Returning to the Master Diver, he gives us the flippers, and tells us to dive among the reefs to take a secret path to Mount Cucco. We will find the reefs he's talking about on the northwest side of the lower part of Sunken City. We travel through a side-scrolling area to reach the mountain. On Mount Cucco, we'll meet two dueling Deku Scrubs. They're brothers, and each believes they have the answer to reaching the dungeon. One says a key is necessary, the other says a keyhole is necessary. To the west of these scrubs, we find the key, but it's unreachable behind a field of holes that we can't cross without the help of Moosh the bear. We can, however, make our way through a cave to the top of the mountain peak. From there, we can jump down to an otherwise unreachable ledge and find a Goron who expands our ring box. Now we can wear up to 3 rings at once. To the east of the battling scrubs, we find Moosh, but he won't budge until he gets a spring banana, which he can smell. There's no way to reach the banana unless it is spring. By climbing a mountain peak near Moosh, we can leap from the peak to an otherwise unreachable ledge and find a portal to Subrosia. As soon as we reach Subrosia, Link is accosted by 2 Subrosians who take Rock's feather from him. They give Link a piece of Fool's Ore in exchange. We've got to get our feather back. What follows is a sequence where we must follow the Subrosian thieves without being seen. It's a stealth sequence like the one that we saw when we followed Rosa to Subrosia for the very first time. But in this case, there are 2 characters we have to keep an eye on. There also aren't any cheap tricks with the characters leaving the screen and then coming back. When we reach the end, the Parathieves bury the feather and then we dig it up as soon as they leave. There's an underground passageway leading to the temple just east of where we entered Subrosia. Through the passageway, we reach the spring tower of the temple and get the power of spring. We then return to the surface and change the season to spring. Stone flowers bloom, allowing us to reach a flying rooster. It's the exact same sprite as the flying rooster that we saw in Link's Awakening. That was the very first game where Link flew using a chicken. In Ocarina of Time, we could pick up chickens and use them to glide from places. I later pegged Majora's Mask as the game to truly introduce flying mechanics into the series because it was a central mechanic of the game, and it was essential for moving through the world, and it just genuinely felt different to me. But here is yet another flying mechanic being introduced in the Zelda series. This is different from the previous ones that we've seen, and it's just a once-off. We can lift a rooster over our heads and then tap the button to make it fly to a nearby peak. Using the rooster, we can get the bananas that Moosh is after. We give the bananas to Moosh, and he gives us a ride, allowing us to reach the dungeon key. We can then use a spring bloom to start a path up the mountain peak. We find another returning character from Ocarina of Time. Malon's father, Talon, is sleeping in a cave. He mumbles something about snow blocking the path, but otherwise does not wake. We just can't get loud enough to get him to wake up. We change the season to winter and then reach a different cave. Using a second flying rooster, we reach the keyhole. Using the key stops a waterfall below from flowing, revealing the entrance to the dungeon. I love the music of Dancing Dragon Dungeon. It may be the best dungeon theme in either of the Oracle games. It's kinda funky while still maintaining that feeling of mystery that many of the dungeon themes in this game have evoked. The first part has a distinct melody performed almost in a question and answer harmony style, with a bass line for the first 20 seconds or so. Then the melody gives way to a trilling section with high notes while the bass line continues. The whole thing lasts about 40 seconds, making it one of the longest dungeon themes found in the Oracle games. The dungeon itself spans 3 floors, 2 above-ground floors and 1 basement level. I think if we combine the 3 floors in our mind, we're supposed to get a full dragon shape, but honestly, this is one of the dungeons where you really have to squint to be able to see the intended shape. The top floor seems to be a head, and that seems to be the most clear. Its snout on the left, its horns on the back of the head to the right. The middle floor is maybe the body with wings outspread, and the bottom floor is maybe feet or a tail? Honestly, I don't see the shape, but that's what I suspect it's supposed to be. We begin on the second above ground floor in the head of the dragon. As soon as we walk in, we're greeted by a pool of water that we must swim through. It makes sense for this dungeon, which was behind a waterfall. But this is the first time I can remember entering a dungeon to find a room filled with deep water in a top-down Zelda game. I would not call this a water dungeon, but it does perhaps feature water more prominently than any other dungeon in this game. A door to the right of the entrance is blocked, forcing us north. We take a minecart further north and bomb a wall, taking us to roughly where the eye of this dragon would be, if it had one. We solve a puzzle involving pushing pots to depress 7 floor switches, before standing on an 8th to get a key. I then used a rail switch to change the direction of the minecart's travel and went west. We push a statue onto a switch to open a door here. Not a hard puzzle by any means, but seemingly a bit of a through line involving pushing things on switches. I then traveled down to the first floor, or the body of the dragon. We then passed through a couple of maze-like rooms packed with enemies in the left wing in order to reach the dungeon map. In the room with the map, we can see a staircase and some enemies just on the other side of a block barrier, but we won't actually be able to reach this side until later in the dungeon. In the room just prior to the one with the map, we find another staircase which leads us to a side-scrolling area. This area notably features an obstacle featuring a series of blocks which disappear and reappear in a set pattern. We need to platform across them to reach the other side. It brings to mind Capcom's Mega Man games. It's almost like Link fell into a part of Heatman's stage in Mega Man 2. I'm not sure if anyone on the flagship team worked on any Mega Man games prior to these Zelda games, but it's hard to not see this Capcom connection. Supervisor Yoichi Yamada stated in an interview translated and published on ZeldaUniverse.net, "We endeavor to retain the Capcomness of these games too." He was specifically referring to the large still story images as an example of that, but this here seems to be another. After successfully completing the platforming challenge, we navigate to a dark room to get another key, then backtrack to the start of the dungeon. We head east through a locked door, dodge some spike traps, and pick up the compass behind a bombable wall along the way. A minecart takes us to the horn on the head. There is a rail switch that we pass, which if we hit, will change the direction of the track so that we can go back west to the front of the head. I skipped going back this way at first, and I really should not have. If we immediately double back, we'll find a single room that needs to be cleared of enemies to get a key. If we don't get it now, we have to backtrack later. In the horn, we use Pegasus seeds together with Rock's Feather to leap over holes and to reach a set of stairs that take us down to the first floor. This is where it becomes clear the item that we will receive in this dungeon. There are some out-of-reach torches that obviously need to be shot, but we don't have the tool to do that yet. In the center of the room on the first floor, we find the mini-boss. The mini-boss is a hooded wizard resembling Aghanim from A Link to the Past. He makes 2 duplicates of himself and appears and disappears in between attacks. We need to use a pair of torches in the center of the room to figure out which of the 3 duplicates is the real mini-boss in order to deal damage. If we light the torches, the real wizard will cast a shadow on the ground. After landing a few hits, the wizard falls, leaving behind a fairy and a portal to the entrance. To the right of the mini-boss room, we find an old man who offers this hint: "What you seek is in the eye." I feel like hints like this in past games were often referring to the shape of the map. But this map has no obvious eye, and we had already visited the room that would roughly be in the eye position in my mind if this dungeon even had one. The hint gnawed at me until I figured it out. South of the mini-boss room, we find another minecart. We can see another rail switch near the cart, but we cannot reach it without that ranged attack. So we take the only path available to us south and run across a room with a collapsing floor to get the dungeon item, the slingshot. After getting the slingshot, we can backtrack and put our new slingshot to use, hitting a couple rail switches to carry us further east in the dungeon. While in the right wing, we come across a room with a skull design in the center that's surrounded by water, and water fills the eye sockets. This is where the earlier hint clicks. Honestly, I don't think this hint would have been needed because I was diving into every body of water I could find just to check if there were items there, but maybe other people don't do that. We dive into the right eye and we get the boss key. We then ride the rails back and we hit the rail switch at the terminal with the slingshot to take the cart west. This will take us through the room where we got the map, but on the other side of the blocks that divide the room. We head down to the basement and use the slingshot to extend a bridge and ride a moving platform in order to reach the boss door. The boss here is Goma. We've seen versions of Goma in the original game, Link's Awakening, and Ocarina of Time. This version has a large pincer which it uses to protect its eye, and to slam Link into the ground if it gets a hold of him. It took me a little bit to figure this fight out. I died once, but eventually I figured out we need to hit the pincer with the sword to make it break off. Then we can shoot Goma in the eye, just as we did in the past games. There is a bit of a twist seemingly inspired by Ocarina of Time. Goma will shoot out little baby Gomas as one of its attacks. We can clear these little babies and continue on with the fight. Eventually the boss falls. We get a heart container and the next essence. It's the Soothing Rain. We're told this essence makes shoots grow into saplings. The Maku tree then points us to Eyeglass Lake. We'll return there next week. Thanks for listening to this episode of Legendary Adventures Podcast. If you want to follow along and you haven't already, please consider subscribing. And a big thank you to everyone who subscribed already and who is following along with this season. You are truly awesome. I'm Paul Riley. I'll see you next week.